Welcome back to Poorly Educated Today in the News, where every morning feels like somebody shook the globe like a snow globe. Except instead of snow, it's oil prices, missiles, and one nervous guy at the Pentagon trying to explain why the receipt says $1.5 trillion. Segment 1. Hormuz hiccups and gas pump heart attacks. The big story today is the Strait of Hormuz, which is currently less of a shipping lane and more of a floating, haunted house for oil tankers. You got American naval blockades on one side, Iranian mines and drones on the other, and commercial ships turning their tracking systems off, like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. Apparently over 100 vessels are just sitting around near the strait, which is what happens when the world economy depends on one tiny water hallway, guarded by angry men with missiles. That is not energy security. That is balancing the global economy on a folding chair at a county fair mud wrestling contest. And because of all this, oil prices are jumping around like a raccoon trapped in a Dollar General. Now the pain has rolled right up to the gas pump, where regular Americans are discovering that filling up a pickup truck now requires either a second job, a small inheritance, or marrying into oil royalty. National gas prices are sitting around $4.50, and out west it gets so bad you almost expect the pump to ask if you want to finance it for 72 months. Politicians are talking about a gas tax holiday, which sounds nice until you realize that knocking 18 cents off a disaster still leaves you paying disaster with cup holder fees. That's like your house being on fire and the fire department saying good news. We found a coupon for the hose. So now everybody is mad, broke, and watching global diplomacy happen through the little gas station screen that keeps yelling about breakfast burritos. Segment 2. Epic fury, fragile ceasefires, and peace plans nobody wants to read. This whole mess comes from Operation Epic Fury, which is a name so subtle it sounds like a monster truck show sponsored by a defense contractor. The United States and Israel launched a massive strike campaign against Iran back in February, aiming at nuclear sites, air defenses, missile systems, and leadership targets. The operation may have hit a lot of military objectives, but now the aftermath is stretching into a war of attrition, which is government talk for congratulations. The bill keeps breathing. Iran fired back with drones and missiles. The region got hotter than a church potluck crock-pot, and everybody started acting surprised that blowing the roof off the barn made the livestock run wild. Then came the ceasefire in April, which was supposed to calm everything down, but right now it seems to be held together with duct tape, bad vibes, and 3 diplomats sweating through their suits. The United States wants Iran to reopen Hormuz, stop enrichment, remove mines, and act normal, while Iran wants sanctions lifted, assets unfrozen, sovereignty recognized, and apparently a full apology note with reparations stapled to it. President Donald Trump rejected the Iranian counterproposal and said he didn't even finish reading it, which is funny until you remember this is not a cable bill. It is a possible regional war. Meanwhile, Iran is threatening to enrich uranium even further if strikes resume, which is the geopolitical version of saying, "Hit me again, and I will turn this Waffle House into a crater." So the ceasefire is not really peace. It is just both sides pausing long enough to reload the argument. Segment 3. The Pentagon wants $1.5 trillion like it's ordering appetizers. Back home, while Americans are selling plasma to afford unleaded, the Pentagon is asking for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. Not billion, trillion with a T. The kind of number that makes your calculator start praying. Defense officials say America needs to return to a wartime footing, restock munitions, build missile defenses, and invest in giant shipbuilding projects, including proposed Trump-class nuclear-powered battleships. I'm sorry. But naming a battleship class after Trump during a fuel crisis feels like putting a golden toilet on a burning pontoon boat and calling it maritime strategy. It is military spending so large you don't even debate it. You just stand near it and hear bald eagles overdraft. Congress is not exactly calm about this, because the Iran war was launched without formal authorization, and now everybody is arguing over whether the ceasefire paused the war powers clock. That is some premium Washington nonsense right there, like telling your landlord you didn't miss rent because time emotionally stopped during the argument. Lawmakers from both parties are starting to push back, partly over the cost, partly over the constitutional mess, and partly because voters can see the difference between a national emergency and a blank check with camouflage on it. The scary grounded part is that burning through missiles in the Middle East may also strain supplies for Ukraine and other allies. So now the country is trying to fight one war, deter another, babysit a blockade, and still convince working families that cutting housing and health programs is just responsible budgeting with a helmet on. Segment 4, China gets the awkward dinner invitation. Because apparently one crisis was not enough, President Trump is heading to Beijing for a high-stakes summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The United States is trying to pressure China to stop buying Iranian oil and use its influence to get Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That sounds simple until you remember America is also threatening China with sanctions, tariffs, and tech restrictions, which is like asking your neighbor to help pull your truck out of a ditch while you are actively letting air out of his tires. The delegation includes big business names like Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Larry Fink, and a whole buffet line of corporate power, because nothing says delicate diplomacy like bringing the CEOs who can smell a supply chain disruption from 6 time zones away. China has leverage because it buys a lot of Iran's oil, but Beijing is not in the habit of doing Washington favors for free, especially when Taiwan, tariffs, technology, and global status are all sitting on the table like suspicious casseroles at a family reunion. Xi can pressure Iran if he wants to, but he is going to want something back, and probably not a handshake and a commemorative hat. The United States needs China to squeeze Tehran, China needs stable energy prices, and Iran needs the world to feel enough pain to negotiate on Iranian terms. That is not diplomacy. That is 3 people holding the same live possum and arguing over whose porch it belongs on. And while they talk in fancy rooms, everybody else is just hoping the price of diesel does not start acting like Bitcoin with fumes. Segment 5, Protests, Europe wanders off, and the chaos side salad. Meanwhile, the American public is getting fed up, and you can see it in the protests and the polling. A lot of voters disapprove of the handling of the Iran war. A lot think the military action did more harm than good, and a whole bunch blame the administration for rising gas prices. That is the thing about foreign policy. Folks may ignore it when it stays on a map, but once it shows up at Pump 4 asking for $87, suddenly everybody becomes a Middle East analyst in flip-flops. Anti-war demonstrations are popping up in cities across the country, with people asking why billions can fly overseas in missile form, while schools, hospitals, roads, and grocery bills are told to tighten their belts. It turns out working people do not love being drafted into the economy of a war they never got to vote on. And the rest of the world is not exactly standing still either, because Europe is starting to act like it may need its own security plan after getting tired of being yelled at and called weak by Washington. The United Kingdom and France are helping organize a defensive maritime mission for Hormuz, trying to secure shipping without turning the whole region into a fireworks stand during a drought. On top of that, we got a hantavirus cruise ship outbreak, Pulitzer Prize journalism about voting rights and abused adopted children, political violence concerns, and Hungary trying to pivot back toward the European Union after years of Orban-style strongman politics. That is the chaos side salad. War, disease, courts, protests, alliances cracking, and one cruise ship reminding everybody that boats are just hotels that can trap you with germs. America wanted strength through maximum pressure, but right now it looks more like maximum pressure on wallets, alliances, and everybody's last nerve. In conclusion, today's news is basically one giant warning label written in gas receipts and missile smoke. The Strait of Hormuz is jammed up, oil is expensive, the Pentagon wants enough money to buy the moon a security system, China is suddenly the awkward middleman, Europe is making backup plans, and regular folks are wondering why world leaders always find trillions for war, but need a committee hearing to fix a bridge. The whole thing feels like watching a drunk man try to fix a tractor with fireworks and a credit card. And somehow, we are all expected to call that strategy.